Alrighty, welcome to another exciting lesson of Pro Mandarin. Now, have you ever wondered how you can get your Chinese friend to tell you a story about what happened, or to open up to you and tell you what's wrong? Or perhaps you're wondering how to fix a vehicle, or how to make pancakes, and all you've got is Chinese people to talk to. Well, by the time you're done with this lesson, you'll be able to ask about all these things, and your Chinese friends will wonder how your Chinese got so good. Well, we'll be talking about how good and bad things are as well in Chinese. Now, you're probably wondering, can I learn all this Mandarin in one video? Well, let's find out. Alright, so the first word we're going to look at today is 怎么. Now, 怎么 can mean a wide variety of things depending on what you pair it up with. And we're going to look into that right now. So the first two phrases are 怎么回事 and 怎么了. They have a lot of similarity in meanings, and in some cases they can be used interchangeably. This, of course, depends on the tone of your voice. So if you say 怎么回事, then you're just saying what happened. But if you say 怎么回事, so you're saying something more of like, what the heck is going on? Now, if you say 怎么了, then you're saying, what's up, what's going on? Or maybe even what happened, or what's the matter? But if you say 怎么了, then you're kind of saying like, what's wrong? Or it could be kind of like, what do you want? It just depends on the tone of your voice. Now, these can be said just as they are, as standalone phrases. However, in order to understand this a little bit better, what we're going to do is we're going to add in some of the pronouns. Now, if you already know the pronouns, you can go and skip ahead. However, if you don't know your pronouns, then go ahead and stick around. Now, the first one is 我, which is I or me. Then we have 你, which is you. And then we have 他, which is he or him. And then we have 她, which is she or her. And then we can add in 们. Now, 们 just makes it plural, so 我们 means we or us. And then we have 你们, which means you guys, and 他们, which means them or they. Alright, welcome back for those that skipped the pronoun section. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and give you one other example before I get you in some practice. So if you wanted to say, what happened to you, or what's going on with you, and you're asking in a concerned voice, the way you'd ask that is, 你怎么回事? Now, again, you could say it in other ways, and that would mean, like, what's wrong with you, or something like that. 你怎么回事? And then again, you can also say, 你怎么了? Which would also mean, what's wrong with you? Or what's going on? So realize that some of these things can be used somewhat interchangeably as well. All right, now with that, let's go ahead and get some practice in. Now, I'm going to give you a few seconds to be able to work it out yourself, but if you need a little extra time, feel free to pause the video if you need to. Now, how would you say, what's wrong with him? Or what's going on with him? 他怎么了? 他怎么了? All right, now how would you say what's going on with them or what happened to them? 他们怎么回事? 他们怎么回事? Now, how would you say what's wrong with them? 他们怎么了? 他们怎么了? Now, one last one before we move on. How would you say what's going on with her or what happened to her? 她怎么回事? 她怎么回事? Now, just to re-emphasize, you could say what's wrong with her using the exact same phrase, or you could say 她怎么了? But if you were to say 她怎么回事 and mean what's wrong with her, like let's say she yelled at you and then she stormed out the room, then you might say 她怎么回事? So that would also mean what's wrong with her? Like what happened to her? Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind that sometimes these can be interchangeably used. Alright, now let's go ahead and move on to the next section here. Alright, so first what we're going to do is take everything out except for 怎么, and we're going to put 做 right afterwards, which means to do or to make. Now, 怎么做, what you're asking is how do you do this? Or how do you make this? So one of the ways that they do this in Chinese is they say what they want to do or make beforehand. So I'm going to give you some vocabulary here that we can work with, and then we'll get some practice in here. So first we got 松饼. Now, 松饼 means pancakes, and then we got 披萨, whereas 披萨 means pizza. Then we got 修车, which means to fix or to repair vehicles. And then we got another verb here, 装, which means to install. So 装发动机 means to install an engine. And then lastly we have 装修, which means to install and or to fix. And then we have 电线, which means electrical wires. So it could be electrical lines, or if I wanted to be more specific, power lines, I would say 高压电线. Although 装修电线 is not something that you're normally going to talk about. In fact, you probably will never talk about it at all in Chinese. However, I do a lot because that's what I do for work. I install high voltage power lines. So the way I would say that is 装修高压电线. Now, the main reason why I showed you these is so that way you can understand a little bit better how the sentence structure works. So I'm going to give you one example here. If I wanted to say, how do you make pizza? I could say, 披萨怎么做? 披萨怎么做? Now, how would you say, how do you install or repair electrical lines? 装修电线怎么做? 装修电线怎么做? All right, now how would you say, how do you repair vehicles? 修车怎么做? 修车怎么做? All right, let's go ahead and flip the order of these things, and I wanted to make a note of something here. Notice how up above we have 做 sectioned off with 松饼 and 披萨. That's because these other ones already have a verb attached to it. So we don't have to say 怎么做修车. We can just say 怎么修车. Now, I wanted to make a little note on 做 as well. It not only means to do, but to make as well. So in this case, we're saying to make pancakes or to make pizza. So with this method, how would we say, how do you make pancakes? 怎么做松饼? 怎么做松饼? All right, now how would you say, how do you install an engine? 怎么装发动机? 怎么装发动机? All right, let's do one more before we move on to the next section. How would you say, how do you make pizza? 怎么做披萨? 怎么做披萨? Now let's go ahead and move on to the next section. But before we do that, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. It really helps me out so I can continue to make quality content like this video. All right, now back to the lesson. All right, welcome back. Let's go ahead and get into the last section here. Now, we're going to go over a couple different things. First, we got 怎么那么, and then we got 怎么这么. So, to better understand this, 那么 and 这么 seem like they can be used interchangeably, and for the most part they can. Even if you mess up on it, they're going to understand what you mean. And that's because it's such a common phrase, 怎么那么. 怎么这么. However, the difference between 那么 and 这么 is kind of like saying the difference between 那个 and 这个, that and this, whereas 那么 are people or time frames that are farther away from you, such as something in the past, or he or her or them or you. That's where you're going to use 怎么那么, whereas 这么may be for today, like how can it be like this today, or it could be for yourself, how could I be so? So that's what you're actually trying to say here. 那么 and 这么 is like emphasizing the so when you're asking a question, such as how can I be so smart, or how can I be so dumb, or whatever. And we'll get more into that in just a second. So 怎么 again means how, 那么 means so. Now, just a quick little note, 那么 actually has a lot of different meanings, but for today's use, we're just going to mean it for so. All right, so let's go ahead and add in the pronouns back over here to the left, and then we're going to add in some more vocabulary here in the next column. The first one is 说的, which means the way that somebody says something. It could be how well they speak, let's say in a lecture, or how well they speak a language or something like that, or what they actually had to say, like how you said that was pretty smart. And then the next one is 玩的. That one is to play, but because we have de at the end of it, then we're saying how they played. Now this could be talking about playing sports or playing video games or whatever. And then 做的 is how well I did or they did or whatever. Now in the last column, we're going to have quite a few pieces of vocabulary here. So first we got 好, which means good or well. And then we got 差, which in this case it's saying basically the opposite, not good or bad or poorly, or something along those lines. And then we got 开心, which means happy. And then we got 快, which means fast. And then we have 慢, which means slow. And then we got two more. We got 聪明, which means smart. And then 笨, which means stupid. So these are going to describe the way that we did these things. So I'm going to give you a couple examples and then we'll get some practice in here. The first example would be, why are you so happy? The way you'd say that is, 你怎么那么开心? 你怎么那么开心? Now, you could mean it in a very negative way, or you can mean it in somewhat of a minor negative way, like 你怎么那么开心啊? Or you could say 你怎么那么开心? So you can tell the aggressiveness and what they actually mean by that, by the way that they say that as well. Now, let me give you one more example before I get you in some practice. So if I were to say, how could he be so stupid? The way I would say that is 他怎么那么笨? 他怎么那么笨? Now, how would you say, how could she do such a bad job? Now, just remember, we're going to use one of those in the middle, like 说的, 玩的, or 做的, and then one of the ones from the last column. So how would you say that? How could she do such a bad job? Or how could she do that so poorly? 她做的怎么那么差? 她做的怎么那么差? All right, now, how would you say, how can you speak so well? Now, remember, this could be in reference to your fluency in speaking Chinese, or you just got done giving a speech, or something along those lines. So how would you say that? How do you speak so well? Or how can you do so well at speaking? 你说的怎么那么好? 你说的怎么那么好? Now, keep in mind here, this could just be in surprise, not necessarily that you mean something negative. So in this case, it doesn't sound negative. All right, now for the next one, how would you say, how is he playing so slow? Or why is he playing so slow? It kind of means the same thing, and you'd say it the same way. So how would you say that? 他玩的怎么那么慢? 他玩的怎么那么慢? All right, and then one more before we move on. How would you say, how come she's playing so well? 她玩的怎么那么好? 她玩的怎么那么好? Now, you could also add on a at the end of some of these, like, 她玩的怎么那么好啊? Okay, so again, that could be surprised, like, wow, how's she playing so well? All right, before we finish up today's lesson, let's go ahead and go over a few more questions that you can answer in the comment section. The first is, how could you be so stupid? Now, how would you say, how are you so smart? Now, this one might come off as a little bit more facetious, so just kind of keep that in mind, but how would you say that? And then the next one is, how am I speaking so slow? In this case, just remember that you're going to use 这么 instead of 那么. And then for the last three, I'm going to give you three more words. The first one is 手撕. Now, 手撕 means sushi, and then we have 意大利面, which means pasta or Italian noodles. And then the last one is 小笼包, whereas 小笼包 is a Chinese dish and it's very delicious. So when you go over to China, make sure to pick yourself up some 小笼包. Now, with these three, how would you say, how do you make sushi? And number 5, how do you make pasta? And number 6, how do you make 小笼包? And if you like this video, make sure you 点赞、订阅和分享这个视频, which means to like, subscribe, and share this video. And until next time, 下次见.